So recently I was teaching the four establishments of mindfulness to some students in Israel. And I came across a phrase in the Mahasatipatthana Sutra that caught my attention. So it's towards the beginning, wherein the Buddha is explaining the kind of qualities a practitioner needs to have when engaging in this practice, which basically involves cultivating mindfulness with regard to four objects: body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. So, among the qualities the Buddha mentions are free from desires and discontent in regard to the world. So the first part, desires, I don't have problem understanding that. I have plenty of those. But it was the second part, discontent with regard to the world. I wondered what he meant by that. And I checked a few translations. Discontent is the word used by Bhikkhu Analayo, who has done a lot of research into the Satipatthana. And a few other translations I looked at had other words like distress, grief, anguish, aversion. Pretty strong words. Discontent sounds kind of mild, but the others sound pretty strong. And I wasn't able to find a great deal of information about this particular mental state. Um, so I was just thinking about it on my own, based on my own thoughts and experiences. And one thought that came to me was, but aren't we supposed to have discontent with regard to the world? Like in renunciation, we're supposed to see the world, i.e., samsara, as full of problems and suffering, dukkha, unsatisfactory, kind of like a prison, something we want to get out of. So shouldn't we feel discontent with regard to the world? But I thought that can't be what the Buddha means, because we do need to have that kind of attitude, renunciation. I mean, we do need to see the world as undesirable and want to be free of it. That's our motivation for practice. If we didn't have that, then we wouldn't have the energy to engage in meditation and all the other practices. And especially in our tradition, in the Mahayana tradition, we need to see the suffering of the world so that we see that all living beings are stuck in this undesirable situation. And then we have the determination to reach enlightenment, to free all of them. So it can't be that was what the Buddha is talking about. Um, and in Bhikkhu Analayo's book on Satipatthana, he says that according to one commentary, this phrase, free from desires and discontent in regard to the world, refers to concentration, having a very concentrated, calm, and contented state of mind while doing meditation. And that these two states of mind, desires and discontent, are hindrances to concentration. So I thought, okay, that makes sense, because I have plenty of experience, both of desires, but also discontent. My mind often gets upset about things when I read the news. I haven't read the news since we started retreat, but normally when I'm looking at the news and hearing about all the awful things happening in the world, the wars and the corruption and the injustice and the hunger and so on, I get really worked up thinking about those things and worrying and feeling unhappy and what should I do about it. But I go too far. I tend to get kind of distressed and start making up stories and thinking about why people do the things they do. And yeah, it gets too far into that kind of way of thinking, and it's a huge distraction during meditation. If that kind of thing comes up when you're trying to meditate, then clearly you can't stay with your object, so it's a big hindrance. And also during daily life, just to be able to keep the mind peaceful and positive in daily life activities. So I thought that's probably what the Buddha's talking about, that kind of mental activity of just getting too carried away with those kinds of thoughts. So I'm thinking that just my own thoughts about this, that we need to have a kind of balance. On the one hand, we do need to be aware of the problems and the sufferings and all the bad stuff happening in the world, not just in the larger world, but also in our own inner world and just in our immediate surroundings. Um, we do need to be aware of suffering because that fuels our practice. Yeah. But we need to not go too far in that direction so that we get stuck in feeling unhappy and worried, negative, and distressed. So we need to transform that awareness of suffering into something constructive and virtuous, such as renunciation, determination to be free, and then practicing the path that will enable us to get free of samsara. And in our tradition, um, developing compassion, like Geshe Tapke in his last teaching was talking about how important it is to be aware of all the different kinds of sufferings of all the different beings in samsara, because that gives rise to compassion, which in turn gives rise to bodhicitta, and then that's the fuel for progressing on the bodhisattva's path. So just have a certain amount of that awareness to then put ourselves into the practice, but not get all caught up in worries and distress and so forth. And I was thinking too that instead of just focusing on the problems and worrying about them, but contemplate the causes of those problems as explained in Buddhism. The afflictive states of mind, especially ignorance about the true nature of things, our I and others and everything else, and then all the afflictive states of mind that arise from that, like attachment and anger, and then karma, the actions that are done. So think about the causes of all those problems, and then resolve to free yourself from those causes so that you can help others do the same, and feel compassion that all those people out there are suffering so much because of having those causes of suffering and not knowing how to be free of them. And also we need to remember how fortunate we are that we do have the conditions that we have, a precious human life, chance to learn the Dharma, practice the Dharma, ideal conditions in which to practice. So that remembrance is always helpful to avoid feeling distressed, because it's just not helpful at all. I mean, that's what I have to say to myself again and again. And getting stuck in these states of worry and distress and so on doesn't do any good. So it's better to, I love the verse from Shantideva where he talks about how if there's something you can do, if there's a remedy to a problem, then do it. And stop worrying. Just sitting around being unhappy and worried doesn't do any good. On the other hand, sometimes there's nothing we can do. It's beyond our ability to do anything. And in that case, again, it doesn't help to worry. Yeah, just put your energy into practicing to reach enlightenment. So so all of this then doesn't mean that we should withdraw from the world and just sit on our meditation cushion and cultivate the the path to enlightenment and not try to do anything to improve things in the world. Because recently I read an interview with His Holiness where this was being discussed, and he said, when faced with economic or any other kind of injustice, it is totally wrong for a religious person to remain indifferent. Religious people must struggle to solve these problems. But then he went on to talk about how we should do this with compassion and not with anger and hatred. So it is important to do what we can to bring about positive, constructive changes in the world. Although I think it's also important to have times for retreat where we, kind of stop listening to the news and just focus on our mind and our practice, and, build up our positive energy so that then when we do come out of retreat and are working with people in the world and so forth, we have more clarity, more compassion, more wisdom in doing that. So these are just some thoughts that I've had so far about that particular phrase that that I found very interesting. And if I have more thoughts later, I'll share them in another BBC. So I hope what I've said does help you to stay free of desires and discontent with regard to the world during your meditation.